Good morning. As Daryl mentioned, my name is Tim Weber. I'm the Director of Security Services for AdNet Technologies. AdNet Technologies is part of the New Charter Technologies family, and I represent one of the folks that's in the national cybersecurity team. I actually come today from the Northeast. I'm based out of Connecticut, where I lead a team of security analysts and incident responders that work with businesses really of all kind of shapes and sizes as they try to navigate the cybersecurity landscape and, in a worst-case scenario, deal with cybersecurity, events. So, what my goal with today's presentation is to kind of walk you through, a ransomware event. What does it look like, and what's the impact? Just a quick show of hands. How many people either know of an organization personally or have actually been through a ransomware event on their own? Wow. Okay. I figured that was going to get a couple of hands. I didn't actually expect it to be 3/4 of the room. That kind of proves my point as to why we're doing this, though. We're in a spot now where ransomware events. For every one ransomware event that you hear of on the news, there's hundreds of them that are happening all of the time. And for those of you who haven't had the misfortune of going through one of these events, what I wanted to do today is really just kind of take you through what does a ransomware event look like mainly from a recovery and a forensic standpoint, because everybody thinks of the ransomware event as the locking of the files, the potential data exfiltration, and all of those things. But one of the things that people don't realize is just how much of a business impact, particularly from a downtime standpoint, that they end up encountering in one of these. So I'm gonna go through a scenario here. My kind of own legal disclaimer, which is we put together a case study here on a ransomware event. It's completely fictitious. It is pulled together, from several incidents that my team has either worked on directly or been secondary on. But this does not represent a specific event. And what I want to do is kind of explain to you how this flows, because it's not always cut and dry. That being said, no two events are the same. It can depend on the severity of the ransom, how many things are encrypted, what type of ransomware, what did the threat actors do, and also what type of systems you have in place and what type of industry you're in. Because one of the first things that we do when we work with an organization that's gone through a ransomware event is we help them get legal counsel involved, whether that's their own legal counsel or if they need specific counsel from a breach standpoint. Please, as we go along, ask questions. I love talking about this. I kind of work best in a kind of a conversational manner. So let's get started from a timeline standpoint. So in our example here, we're going to talk a small professional services firm. The event starts out on a Wednesday. Oops. And one of the things that my team has seen in a lot of these events is it's very, very rare when something happens that you instantly recognize that it's a ransomware event or some type of cybersecurity event. Usually there's some type of precursor activity or it gets noticed in different ways. So you see in our timetable here that it doesn't start out with somebody going, oh my God, we have ransomware. It's those first users coming into the office going, hey, why can't I access my stuff? Why can't I access my files? And I already see heads nodding, so it sounds like some people have been through this. It doesn't necessarily portray or manifest itself. And if it's like most organizations, your users were going to initially think, oh, it's just me. I'm doing something wrong. And it's not until people start, really kind of, leaning over their cubes and going, hey, can you access the files on the G drive or in SharePoint or this, that, or the other thing? And that's when people start to realize that, hey, okay, I'm glad it's not just me, but what are we dealing with? So in these cases, again, we did this example based off of what our team's done, is that's when somebody's going to reach out for help, to support. And as my team always likes to remind me, not every system or network issue is a security event. When you live in the security world, you become a pessimistic, worst case scenario kind of person. You look at everything. See more heads nodding. You look at everything through the lens of, okay, what's the worst thing that could happen to me today type aspect. So, as support goes through it, they'll take a look at it. And, our teams, most support teams are trained really well to look at things. And there's some real classic telltales of ransomware, not the least of which sometimes is a ransomware note that says, hey, you've got ransomware, and here's what you need to do to deal with it. So there can be some lags in this, but typically in our organization, we have as I mentioned before, we've got a dedicated security practice. After our support team recognizes this, it ends up getting escalated to my team to really start to dig into. So at 11 o'clock, we've confirmed at this point that it's a cybersecurity event. Now, one of the biggest things that happens here is we tell the organization, you need to stop using all of your systems. Nothing. Okay? That can be everything from your file system, if you're a professional services like a law firm, your case management, your email system, even if it's in the cloud, if it's in Office 365, potentially even your phones. Now, the reason why we do that is until we know what's actually going on, how is it been contained, we don't want to take any actions that could actually tip off the attackers. So think about that for a second. Think of if you're a business that interacts with the customers, on a regular basis through email, and we all of a sudden tell you, yeah, you can't use your email. Now you have to start potentially using personal email addresses and things along those lines. So it becomes incredibly significant, and it becomes one of the most difficult things for an organization. I know, a compromise we worked for a law firm, we told them that they couldn't use any of their systems. And I still remember to this day the managing partner coming up to me going, Tim, I've got clients coming in for closings tomorrow. And I said to him, I says, you're not going to be able to take care of them. And just the look of anguish on his face. And that's one of the things, if you've been lucky enough to not go through one of these events, that most people don't realize is the mental and emotional toll that a cybersecurity event takes on the leadership of an organization, really on an entire organization, but in particular the leadership. There's so many unknowns. You feel violated. You feel just betrayed. You might question, are we going to be able to stay in business? What's going to happen? Is this just the first salvo in a much bigger opening thing? It's traumatic. And one of the things, I work outside of my work in cybersecurity, I work as a volunteer firefighter. So I've got a lot of training in helping people through these situations. And I spend a lot of time trying to reassure people because these things are awful. There's no getting around that. But anything we can do to kind of help calm people down is what we need to do, and then start taking action. So what we'll do at this point is we always ask a couple of questions right out of the gate, and one of them is do you have cyber insurance? And hopefully most organizations have it at this point. I'm still candidly kind of surprised at how many organizations don't have it. That could actually be a topic for a whole nother presentation, how much the cyber insurance market has changed just in the last 120 days. But getting the cyber insurance and your legal counsel involved very, very quickly becomes significant because you have to be thinking as you're working through these events that this could end up in litigation. And everything that you do has to be able to stand up in court. And the actions that my team takes, we have defined processes with checklists and sign-offs and things like that. It's just so that if, God forbid, one of these things ends up in some type of litigation matter, that we can help protect our client. So we will typically kind of take a stopping point here. Now, one of the things that happens is, and this has been one of the most surprising things to me is if cyber insurance is involved, sometimes it can take upwards of 24 to 48 hours to kind of get everything moving forward. Now, in some cases, the cyber insurance providers will allow us to continue to work the event if the client so chooses. Sometimes they want to bring in a national incident response firm. We're kind of fine, either way. It really ends up being the customer's choice. I would recommend to you that, and we'll talk about things that you can do to protect yourself at the end, but you should have copies of your cyber insurance information stored offline and know how to contact your carrier and or your broker. In most cases, I would actually recommend you can let your broker know, but most of the major cyber insurance carriers actually have dedicated support lines for breach response. And you want to get that invoked just as early on. Even if you think you're not going to file a claim. With a ransomware, you're probably going to file a claim because, God forbid, you actually have to pay a ransom. Anybody know what the average ransom price is now? Ballpark? $500,000. $500,000 now. Average ransomware price is, I think it's, the last number I saw was $508,000. So, 508,000. So, 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,000. 508,0 you want to make sure that you have that cyber insurance and you get them invoked, because you're going to potentially be racking up an incredible amount of costs if you have to pay the ransom, and also with potentially the legal fees. If you have to do mass communications and provide credit monitoring, again, a lot of different things that come into play. So we're at a point now where we're on day 2. We get to the afternoon. Cyber insurance has authorized AdNet to really start working on this. One of the things that we look for and we found early on is evidence of tools that could be used for data exfiltration. I'm going to come back to this later, but this becomes a very significant aspect of a ransomware event, and I'll cover that once the timeline's through. I mentioned before that all of the steps that we're taking in here need to be done in the context of supporting litigation. So when we do investigations, the first step that we have to do in that is that we have to take images, because we never want to work on the live data. And this is one of the things that a lot of clients don't understand is well, I just want you to come in and fix everything and start restoring things. And the reality is that we can't. We're going to go with the direction of your legal counsel primarily. But the biggest thing that you need to do is you need to get those images, because those are the things that we're going to use to basically do all of our forensic work, because we never want to work on live copies of the data. Just like any of you that do anything that where you have to work with evidentiary rules, you never work on the primary source. So again, keep in mind that all of this work is going on, but business operations are still shut down. You're dark, you're closed basically. You're not answering your phones, you're not emailing people from your corporate email address. Again, we're day 2, we're 2 days into this. Day 3, the imaging of the servers is complete. I will tell you that there is no longer process. It's kind of like watching a pot boil. Is when you're imaging a server, that process seems to take forever, and depending on the types of data you have, it can be days. It can be days upon days. One of the things that we will do to try and help speed up that process is prioritize systems, and we will prioritize systems based off of our initial kind of containment actions, things that we're looking for. If we see a system that's not impacted, we may do that imaging later. We always try to triage and prioritize these things the best we can. So by 8 o'clock, we're still continuing our work on our containment. Again, one of the biggest things that we need to do when we're working any type of cybersecurity event is before we can really get too far into the forensics or start any of the restoration, we need to make sure that the bad guys still aren't in the system. Because the worst thing in the world would be starting to do remediation, start doing file recovery, start resetting passwords, doing all those things, and then just to have everything get encrypted again. That's a nightmare scenario for us. So we're always trying to find that balancing act, because in most cases, I've got the managing partner or the CEO or the CFO, kind of breathing down our neck going, when can we be back up? When can we be back up? When can we back up? And that's a completely understandable thing. But we have to go through this process, because shortcutting the process, doing work to get you up and running maybe a day or 2 earlier, can have disastrous consequences down the road. So we're working through this process as we go, trying to, in that containment efforts, we do things such as looking at log files. So we're looking to see, is there evidence of somebody getting in through firewall? Looking at remote access connections. We're doing things such as dumping the volatile memory so we can see who's logged in at the time, what type of network connections. Again, we can get all incredibly geeky on some of this stuff, and I'm very blessed that I have people that are way, way smarter than I am who can do those things. But it's a matter of putting together a picture. And one of the things that I always tell clients when we're working a cybersecurity event is, especially a ransomware event, is working a cybersecurity incident is a lot like putting together a puzzle with two primary catches. One, you don't have the box, so you don't actually know what the picture's supposed to look like. And 2, you're missing some percentage of pieces. So you may be missing just 2 pieces, or you may be missing 20% of the pieces. So one of our team's favorite phrases when we're working on things is based on the available evidence. We don't speculate. We provide logs, we provide analysis, we provide what are the things that we can prove based off of the information we found, and then we leave it up to the really smart attorneys who can actually help a client decipher that. So again, this is all best case scenario. The average recovery time from a ransomware event is about 2 weeks at this point. So day 4, we're on Saturday. So by Saturday morning, we've determined where the compromise happened. In our hypothetical example, it was a firewall vulnerability that allowed somebody to get VPN credentials because they were not using multi-factor authentication. I think that's our third plug of the morning for why multi-factor authentication is important. And we're starting to take efforts. And what we'll do with that is, as soon as we know where the source was and have a semi-decent picture of what type of systems might have been impacted, we're going to start letting the organization back into things. So in our example, if it was a network that got ransomwared, but the client's using cloud-based systems and there's no evidence of access to the cloud-based systems, as a precautionary measure, we'll do a password change, but then we'll start letting people back into those systems. Because again, I get it from a business standpoint that while it'd be nice to allow the security people to do their stuff for days, weeks, or months, you've got a business to run. So at that point, we have the organization going back into their systems after we do all of the necessary password changes. We scrub the system for any old accounts. We'll look for new accounts that were potentially created, because one of the things that attackers will do is they'll create backdoor accounts and things like that. And once, again, we're trying to do a lot of things in parallel. We now start doing restoration of the servers. Now, this is one of the things where completely your mileage may vary depending on the type of systems you have, depending on the type of data you have. If anybody in here is doing things with healthcare and they have images, or anybody that's an architectural engineering firm that has CAD drawings, the size of your data is just enormous. I mean, it's just god-awful. And that takes a long time to recover from. And again, we're in a scenario here where we're not necessarily paying the ransom, or at least not thinking we're paying the ransom. But even if you go down a route where you decide to pay the ransom, that's not an immediate flip of a switch to run that decryptor. It takes time. It takes almost as long time to decrypt as it did to unencrypt as it did to encrypt. And unfortunately, some of these decryptor utilities from these ransomware groups are written poorly, I guess is probably the nicest way to say it. And it can take a lot of iterations to go through it. So we continue moving forward. Again, anytime we work a scenario, we're going to, ask the client to help us prioritize what's the most critical systems. So that's one of the things that you as organizations can do is whether it's part of an incident response plan or a business continuity disaster recovery plan. Obviously, where you guys are down here, you have a lot of weather-related events to deal with. You should always know, what's my most critical system to get up and running? And then what's my second? And what's my third? And what's my fourth? Because while it would be nice to say we can, flip that magical switch and get everything back up and running, that's not necessarily a world we live in. So being able to articulate to whether it's a team like mine or somebody else's team, hey, here's the things that I need and here's the order that I need them in, makes a really, really big difference. So we're now on day, we're now on day 5. We're on, Sunday. We've got, even once you've done the restore, that doesn't, again, there's no magic here. There's still work that has to happen. So we're now into Sunday. We've 8 a.m. Sunday. Again, this incident started on Wednesday. So we're 5 days into this and we've got one system back online. Now we're working on the second system, which then takes us into Monday. And by the end of Monday, we've completed the remediation. So we're at a point where, while the forensics are happening kind of side by side with this, we've got the systems back up and running. And as our disclaimer, says here, this is an absolute best case scenario. We only use this for the purposes of the presentation because I didn't want to have 30 slides on, and this is what happens on this day, and this is what happens on day 12 and 13 and 14. Realistically, you are in a 1 to 2 week recovery time. That's just recovery. And you could be dealing with these events for months. Now, there was something that happened early on that we talked about that I want to go into a little bit bigger detail. This is an example of a data leak site. So this is an example of Avidon where they will post, hey, we took a copy of your data. Now, when we first started seeing ransomware in the early 2010s, I mean, it's ironic that ransomware has been around as a threat for pushing 10 years at this point. All the ransomware groups would do is they would encrypt your data and they would hold it, hostage until you paid. Obviously, as an industry, we all got smarter and we realized that the best way to kind of cover ourselves from that is to have good backups, right? Well, the threat actors realized that their old methods were no longer as successful, so they basically upped their game. And one of the things that we see now, this has been going on for 2.5, 3 years, is that the threat actors will gain access to a system, and before they do the ransomware, before they kind of light the match on the way out the door, they'll take a copy of your data. And they will threaten to release that data unless you pay the ransom. That's a game-changing moment. That changes the entire dynamics of a ransomware event, because now you may not have been considering, even if you get the best backups in the world, you may actually have to pay the ransom now, which ends up getting further complicated because there are some ransomware groups that are sanctioned by the US government that you are not allowed to pay. That's something where if you paid that ransomware group, you could actually get fines from the Treasury Department, which is absolutely insult upon injury. But think about it. Think if any of you are in the healthcare field, the accounting field, the legal field. The presentation, the keynote this morning talked about data privacy. Having a ransomware event and having your data get published is a really quick way to getting Department of Health and Human Services to come take a visit to your office. Again, this is just adding layers of awfulness on top of each other. So for that reason, one of the first things our team looks for in a ransomware event is, are there any signs of data exfiltration? And there's ways that we can do that based off of, we can look for the artifacts of tools that were installed. One of my favorites is we worked an investigation, and we saw that the threat actors installed a copy of Gmail in Russian on this server and then deleted it. And that gave us a pretty decent sense of geographically where this threat, where these threat actors were coming from. Because of the threat of because of actual data exfiltration, we've seen organizations pay mid-six-figure ransoms. I also work with one organization where it was our best, I don't want to call it guess, but our best estimation that no data exfiltration had happened, nor had the threat actor group been claiming it. But the client was so concerned about political repercussions of it that they paid the ransom anyway. So again, we're not going to get into the aspects of paying the ransom. I get that it's a business decision, and it's unfortunately a necessary one at times. But the more ransoms that get paid, the more that this fuels. And until that cycle gets broken, it's unfortunately these threats are just going to continue. So hopefully you can all acknowledge that this is this is a pretty awful event. So the good news is that it's a numbers game. So there are things that you can do to help yourself, before, during, and after a ransomware event. Where I live in Connecticut, I'm up a little bit in the sticks, and our town has a lot of bears. And one of the jokes in town is if you're going for a hike and you encounter a bear, you don't have to be faster than the bear. You just have to be faster than your friends. And that's true with cybersecurity is that there is no perfect level of security. But if you're more secure than the next organization, or the next organization, or the next organization, you're going to decrease your likelihood of having a cybersecurity event. If somebody wants to get into your systems with enough time, money, computing power, and talent, they're going to get into it. There is no silver bullet. There is no magical solution on this, and anybody that tells you anything different, they're just, check the fine print at the bottom of whatever they're saying, because it's. I've seen systems that I never thought would have gotten compromised that get compromised. So again, there's things that you can do. First of all, is know your coverage. Have a copy of your coverage. And one little safety tip that I learned recently from somebody that works for a national incident response firm that worked for our team is, don't store your cyber insurance information on your network. Two reasons for that. One is if your stuff gets encrypted, now you don't actually have access to it. But the other thing is that a lot of times ransomware is the last thing that these attackers are doing. They may be in your system for days, weeks, or even months beforehand. There's a concept called dwell time, which is the difference in time from how long somebody's in your system before you realize it. In a lot of cases, people don't realize somebody's in their system until something terrible has been done. One of the things his organization has seen is is that the threat actors will go looking for the policy information. So if they find your policy document and they see that you have $1 million of ransomware coverage, guess how much they're going to ask for in ransom? They're going to ask for $1 million. And they're not going to negotiate. That's one of the reasons why the major cyber insurance carriers are also huge targets of cyber attacks. Recently, Aon got popped for something. That's like a shopping list. If they can get into an insurance company and see who all their insureds are and what their policy limits are, that is just a recipe for who are we going to target. So again, if it wasn't so awful, it would be brilliant, but it is awful. Sorry, caffeine's kicking in. Yeah, I wish I didn't have integrity. I could make a ton of money, but. These are the things that you need to be mindful of. You have to think of somebody. These are criminals. I know hackers get glorified. Everybody thinks that they're all sitting, with the gray hoodie over their, over their head, sit hunched over a keyboard. No, these are criminal groups. This is criminal enterprises, in some cases state-sponsored, that have a ton of backing because they're making millions of dollars. The FBI's crime report just came out this morning. $2.8 billion was lost in business email compromise last year. $2.8 billion. And arguably, I'm going to say that number's probably low by half because there's not mandatory reporting yet, although the president just signed legislation last week as part of the omnibus spending bill to start doing that in critical industries. So nobody necessarily knows the exact scope of it. So you need to know what you're covered. We worked a ransomware event a couple years ago. Client thought they were okay because they had $30,000, which now seems quaint, in coverage, and we were able to help them recover. Fine print afterwards was that they found out that only $5,000 of that could be used for restoration services. So, much like when you get on an airplane, they don't wait to do the safety drill until there's a problem with the airplane and trying to explain to you how to put your oxygen masks on and things like that. They tell you beforehand. The same reason kids do fire drills at school. You need to know these things so that if the god-awful thing happens, that you're ready. So there's other things that you can do. One is, train your teams. You could buy every security technology that my team and Daryl's team has in place and put all this whiz-bang technology out there. But if Betty in accounting still clicks on that link because she thinks it's a real invoice from somebody, sorry, I hope I didn't hit a nerve on that for somebody. It's all for naught. The employees are the first line and the best line of defense. You need to get your users to a point where they are borderline paranoid is probably the best way to describe it. Because having that extra couple minutes to check the validity of an email, to not click on something if they're not 100% sure, that can save weeks of restoration, and it can save months of anguish. So, in one of the events that we worked, a law firm that not only had ransomware but had data exfiltration, their event started at the end of January. In September, they were still going through the legal process and still dealing with having to notify all of their clients that, hey, your information may have been compromised, and offering credit monitoring and things like that. So these are not short duration events, even after you get out of the technical piece, even after you get made whole. Think about it too, if you're a manufacturer, what's the impact if your systems are down and you can't ship for a week? If any of you do any type of work where you do fulfillment for Amazon, oh my God, the penalties are severe if you can't actually meet their delivery deadlines on things. So again, you have so much potential exposure from an operational standpoint, from a regulatory standpoint. I mentioned, if you're HIPAA, Health and Human Services, the previous speaker talked about the absolute patchwork quilt of state laws that are coming up. Every single state's got something in the works at this point. Reputational hit. Do you really want to be on the 6 o'clock news having to report that you had a cybersecurity event? No. So again, these things are absolutely critical. And none of these things are necessarily rocket science. So, outside of training your employees, you need to invest in more advanced security solutions. There's a lot of fallacies I deal with small business owners about, about security and how they think it won't impact them. And one of them is, Tim, we're good because we got a firewall and we got antivirus software, and nothing could be further from the truth. Every single ransomware event my team has worked, the organization's had antivirus software. Antivirus software just isn't enough anymore. It's outdated technology that it just can't, it's meant to be gotten around. So things such as endpoint detection and response, EDR, MDR, which is a managed version of that, where you not only have this protection software in place, but you actually have live humans that are watching for the alerts that are coming up, can make an absolute critical difference between you having to be a victim on this first slide and having a close call. We worked with an organization, we've got a manufacturer, where we are at in Connecticut, infamous for a lot of things, but we have a lot of defense contractors, jet engines, submarines, things like that. And one of our defense contractor clients, had somebody who clicked on something, because that's how a lot of these things start, unfortunately. And fortunately, they had our advanced EDR software in place that actually picked up the kind of anomalous behavior that this was doing and stopped it. And a SOC analyst was able to take a look at it, elevate it to our team, where we realized this was a threat that nobody had seen before. And that's what we're up against. If they had just had regular antivirus software with nobody watching it, no kind of advanced aspects to it, they would have been compromised, and they would have most likely ended up with ransomware at some point. So I'm a huge believer. Actually, I don't have MFA on this slide, but MFA, EDR, security information and monitoring is absolutely critical. Anything you can do to increase the amount of logging that you have on your system. I talked before about the phrase my team uses of based on the available evidence. We can only put together a picture based on the log files that exist. So anything you can do to store, collect, and retain log files is absolutely critical. We worked a case a couple years ago, not a ransomware, but an email compromise up in the state of New York, and the state of New York has something called the SHIELD Act. Unfortunately, this user had emails going back 7+ years in her mailbox that had Excel attachments, that had all of these things. Fortunately, they actually had enough logging in place that we were able to affirmatively prove that the attackers didn't access those attachments. And that actually saved the client from having to make this a reportable event and potentially get fined by the state of New York. So again, log files are your friend. Protect your systems and your data. Backups aren't sexy, but oh my God, if God forbid the worst thing happens, you'll be happy that you have good backups. So continual disk-based to cloud backups. You have to have a copy of your data offsite. Obviously, I don't need to explain that to businesses that are in New Orleans of how important it is to have data offsite, and that offsite needs to be truly offsite. When I'm working with an organization, I will ask them usually 3 to 4 questions about where their backups are. And if you have, say you're an organization that has multiple locations, an offsite backup does not necessarily count if it's just to one of your other locations. Because if it's just to one of your other locations, if your system has been compromised, then potentially those remote locations, especially if you have site-to-site VPNs, can also be compromised as well. Thank you. So you need to have a true offsite copy of your backups. Because there's nothing worse if somebody's like, yeah, we're using Veeam and I'm replicating it to my site in New Jersey. And it's like, okay, is that connected to the network? All right. Yeah, let's go have you check that real quick. And then you get that, that phone call with the head drooped, which is, those backups are toast as well. So typically the 2 biggest factors we see organizations face that cause them to potentially have to pay the ransom are there signs of data exfiltration? And 2, do they actually have backups to recover? I actually did work one case last year where the client it was a small ransomware event, which is weird to say, but it only encrypted a couple of things. And the client actually looked at that and goes, yeah, we don't need that data. Okay. But that's one out of hundreds that we've been involved with. So that's the exception, not the norm. Regularly conducting risk assessments. How many of you have ever done a risk assessment or had a risk assessment done on your system? All right, so maybe about a quarter of the room. Risk assessments are something that's absolutely critical. It's something that my team spends a lot of time doing. My goal is to not have to help to work with organizations such as yours because something like this has happened. What a risk assessment is you can think of that as getting a comprehensive security checkup of your system. Not unlike you go to the doctor every year for your physical, and you may not want to hear what your weight is and your cholesterol and things like that, but not knowing doesn't mean you don't have a problem. It means you just don't know. Getting a security risk assessment done is absolutely critical because now you know where your risks are. Anytime we start working with an organization, we always position the risk assessment as the starting point because I don't want somebody to come in and buy, our fancy security monitoring system and application only to find out that they've got 2-character passwords that don't ever expire. They've got terminal services open to the network, and they're still backing up to tapes on an occasional basis. Risk is all about figuring out, planning for risk. It's figuring out what are the most likely things that are happen and where you can get the most bang for your buck. So doing a security risk assessment, initially, and then making it, just like with your physicals or your financial checkups, making it on an annual basis is absolutely critical because that's how you can stay ahead of these curves. One of the worst things that happens is we might do a risk assessment for somebody, and then a new threat comes out and we're like, well, we got to scan for that. Well, didn't you just check all of our stuff and say we're okay? And I'm like, yeah, but we didn't know about that threat 2 months ago. We were dealing, we dealt with a lot of that with the Log4j stuff that happened last fall. So, conducting the risk assessments allows you to kind of build that security roadmap. And security is a continual journey. It's not a one and done. It's something that you have to keep working on. So I can't stress those enough. And then last is knowing your risks and having a plan. You don't want to be making this up as you go. I've seen both ends of the spectrum where I've seen organizations who clearly have had an issue, clearly have a reporting obligation go, okay, we're good, thanks. I kind of given them that side eye of, yeah, you're not, but in the end, I can't make somebody do things. I've also had the opposite, where I worked with a gentleman who had a financial services practice, sole practitioner, who had his email get compromised, and before any investigation was done, he started sending off emails to his clients and to the attorney generals of all the states he works in. Okay, equally not good. You need to have a plan. You need to have solid counsel on these things. But, I'm not making these things up. These are real life events that happen within months of each other. So these are things that you need to know. What are your obligations? What type of data do you have? Because I've seen scenarios where somebody goes through a compromise. I start asking about the data. Do you have any credit card data? The CEO will be like, no. And you'll see the controller go, well, yeah, we actually have a spreadsheet with all the credit cards over here. Okay, now we've got a different scenario. Or my favorite was a manufacturing client that I had been working with for 20 plus years, who had HIPAA information because they self-insured. So they actually had PHI on their system that we had no idea about. Fortunately, that came out as a result of a risk assessment and not as a result of a security event. Thank God. Having a plan will kind of help keep things calm. Mike Tyson once had a great quote that everybody's got a good plan until they get punched in the face. I'll go from Mike Tyson to Dwight Eisenhower, which is plans are useless, but planning is everything. And that's what you need to do. No two scenarios. And again, my team is, I like to joke we're a little bit like State Farm. We know a lot because we've seen a lot. But even then, we still get surprised on a regular basis with events that we see. But having a good structure, having a good plan, having a team like Daryl's team who can back you up, who can pull in resources like us, having solid legal counsel who either directly has cybersecurity and breach notification requirements, knowledge within their firm, having a good partner who can cover you from an insurance standpoint is absolutely critical. Last year it was expected that there was going to be $6 trillion of damages from cybersecurity events. This threat is not going to go away. It is going to continue to go up exponentially, and there's just nothing we can do. So while we always want to hope for the best, we need to make sure, again, you guys down here never want to have a hurricane happen, but just wishing it away isn't going to do anything. You have to plan and you have to be prepared. So with that, I think I've left about 5 minutes. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the question was, is in regards to backups, how concerned to be about cloud backups? From a security security point, I'm typically not as concerned because one of the neat things that most of those cloud providers do is they've actually built in ransomware protection. So like if you're working with Microsoft, say you're using OneDrive or something like that, and you've got it mapped on your system as a drive, if all of a sudden that's trying to get encrypted, Microsoft and the others actually have built-in protections to kind of lock those things down. Where you do have a concern is going back to the gentleman's keynote this morning, which is okay, who's storing what, where? Becomes, to me, it's less of a security issue and more of a privacy issue because, that's that concept of quote unquote shadow IT, where people start finding ways to share information. You have no insight on it, so you have no idea what type of controls. But from a pure security perspective, as long as you're working with a reputable organization, I'm not typically too concerned. Good question, though. Yes. Sure. Yeah. So EDR and MDR. EPP is endpoint protection software. EDR is an offshoot of that. So I love EDR. I could literally do an entire session on EDR. So sorry. EDR works differently in antivirus. The way antivirus typically works is it has a database. It has a database of files based off of file hashes, and anytime you go to access something or do something, it looks at its big giant book and goes, are you good or are you bad? And it'll do some behavior analysis and things like that. But it's very heavily leaning on that Bible of stuff. The problem is that doesn't lend itself well to new types of threats. What EDR does is EDR looks at behaviors, and it has a whole, typically either machine learning or AI-based type of learning that happens. So say, for example, I were to email you a Word document that has macros enabled, and you were to bypass all the warnings of why macros are bad, and you open the document with the macros enabled, and all of a sudden now that starts running command scripts and PowerShell commands on your system. That's not a normal behavior. So what an EDR software is going to do is go, I don't think this is right. Let me kill and quarantine this process. So what it does is it makes a significant impact in being able to detect, to stop and quarantine newer types of threats. One of the things you're going to see, anybody have to renew their cyber insurance recently? Yeah. Did you get a question about EDR probably on it? Yeah. So you might, especially with some of the carriers in particular, will actually have separate riders now for ransomware, and EDRs will be one of the things that they ask about. What MDR is it's the EDR software with humans that are actually watching it. So one of the solutions that our team has and Daryl's team will have shortly is an EDR-based solution where there is a 24/7 security operations center, a SOC, that's actually watching that. While the software does the bulk of the work, having those human eyes on it is actually what makes the system really powerful because it allows us to quickly react to things. So does that answer your question? Good, thank you. All the way in the back. Great question. So question about difference between offsite and offline. Ideally both in my world. Offsite is good, but if offsite is just physically out of your building but still network accessible, then that's a problem. Where offsite and offline, so it can't actually be accessed, that's kind of the dream scenario for me, whether it's replicating to another site, but it's not kept in a perpetually online state, or you're going to a cloud provider and there's no direct hook or things like that. Makes all the difference. So even further back. So yeah, you can't. you can't protect or investigate what you don't know. And again, it's one of the less exciting pieces about security, but asset management is a key piece of it. Yeah, I mean, a lot of times if a client already doesn't have EDR, that's the first thing that we are deploying when we get called into an investigation, and it becomes a little bit of a game of whack-a-mole to try and find all the machines. So having a solid, that's a great point. I'll probably update our slides with that. Is having a good inventory of what all your assets are, so we can make sure we're all protected. We worked a case one time where ransomware, the one where their cyber insurance didn't cover everything, and there was one machine that the client forgot to tell us about. Wouldn't you know, once we put the EDR software on it, that was patient zero. So I think I am out of time at this point. My name is Tim Weber, Adnet Technologies. Hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm going to be here the rest of the day. I'm talking the CMMC panel. If you couldn't tell, I have a lot of passion for this stuff. I love talking about it. I love helping people. Thank you for your time today. Appreciate it.